Hello everyone, welcome to Game Design 1. This is our first live lecture for this term. My name is Jose Montanez and I am the Associate Course Director for Game Design 1. So, in this class, we're going to cover the basics of game design, how to do documentations, flowcharts, and you will create your own strategy card game and go through the testing and iteration cycle of development. So, as I said before, my name is Jose. I may not be the course director that you see on FSO. There are a couple of us that teach Game Design 1. Your course director is listed in your class. If you need to get in touch with them or have any questions for them, send them a message on FSO. That will generate an email that will go to them. Another person that you will see on FSO that everyone will see is Kyle Ramos. He is the lab specialist for Game Design 1. He may be answering your questions besides your course director. So let's go over what we're going to be doing in this class. We are going to be, this is exciting. This is your first game design class. We're going to be talking about the discipline of game design, meaning what game designers do and ways to be successful at it. We will be talking about techniques and tools which game designers use to create products, but most importantly, we'll focus on hands-on practice. This practice is going to take two forms. One will be exposing yourself to new mechanics and interactions. The second one, you'll be creating your own game by prototyping and playtesting. So in all of this, we're going to be, just the discipline of game design, the techniques of game design, and the practice of game design. So let's go. This is a brief overview of what we're going to do each week. So this first live lecture, we're going to be going over the introduction to game design, meaningful choice, and documentation. Week 2, we're going to do mechanics and starting practices, as you will be actually developing your game during week 2, or at least the rules and your first solo playtest. In week 3, we're going to go over the analysis, prototyping, and playtesting. And week 4 will be the shortest week. That's just an open discussion. So basically, whoever has questions, you get on at this time at 5 o'clock, and you can ask me your questions. Otherwise, you'll be using your time to test your game. So this week will be the longest. Each subsequent week will get a bit shorter, culminating with the shortest one, well, the shortest live lecture in week 4. So the required reading materials will be found in the book by Zach Highweller. It's called Player Making Decisions. You can find it on Safari online using that link that you see there. This link is also posted on FSO in the Welcome to Game Design section in that document. For this class, we do have suggested start times for assignments, and you can see the due dates. Now, this slide is also available in the Welcome to Game Design document found on FSO. So you don't have to pause the video here. You can just go to FSO and see it, or you can actually just download it from FSO. So time management. The time that you need to devote to this class will vary depending on your familiarity with the topics and mechanics used in analog games. Part of this is in your control. Part of this class, you'll be making a strategy card game starting next week. This class can require a large time commitment, up to 40 hours a week. Again, that depends on your familiarity with the topics and mechanics. Time is your enemy, so start early. And be sure you set aside more time than you think you need, because you will need it. An example is you might design a game that you feel is 15 minutes. Well, anytime you've ever played a game the first time, it always takes longer than the approximate time because, one, you don't know the rules. Two, you don't know how things are supposed to flow and what's supposed to happen when. So there's a lot of constant back and forth looking at the rules and going back to the game. This is even more so when you are designing your own game, as especially in the beginning, as your game isn't fully fleshed out and you're still finding bugs and trying to uh, work around some problems that you are running into. So plan accordingly. Yeah, you might think your game takes 15 minutes. It might even take you 15 minutes to play the game. However, when other people get involved, that time is going to explode. It will become larger. So, what is game design? Sorry about that. What is a game designer? A person who designs games, right? Technically, that's not wrong, but let's take a closer look. So, game designers is a broad term. It covers many different specialities, but in general, designers fall into three major categories. We have our system designers, we have our level designers, and we have our narrative designers. And you'll note I'll have a little asterisk on narrative designers, and I'll get to that at the end. Under each of these broad categories, they have specific roles, especially in bigger companies. Under systems designers, some examples are economy designers, weapon designers, and combat designers. Under level designers, you have like pathing designers, you have mission designers, and you have some encounter designers. Under narrative, you usually have story and dialogue. The asterisk is there on narrative designers because if you're looking to be a narrative designer, this is not the program for you. We specifically train the students that are coming through this program to be systems or level designers. Narrative designers, if you're interested in that, the program to go to for that is creative writing. Most of the time, and I want to say about 90% of your narrative designers are authors, are writers. That's what they do for a living. They may not even know how to use a game engine or game design stuff, but they're really good at crafting stories and writing the dialogue. So that is their job. That is what they do. That is not what we teach. If you're interested in that, again, contact your academic advisor and take a look at our creative writing program. So what are the major fields that a game designer can go into? Well, there's really three major fields, and you'll notice that there are four things listed on the slide. And that's because the last one, which is VR, AR, is an emerging technology. It's still in its fledgling state. People are still messing around with it, and it hasn't really solidified as to what it's going to be and where it's going to land. So later on in the program, there will be some work with VR, AR, but right as of today, there's not really a VR, AR thing that you go to. There are a few companies that do that, and they're pioneers. So right now, that's not a topic that I can really go into with any depth because it's changing every day. But your three major fields are video game industry, military simulation / serious games, and then the gambling industry. And each one of these has different breakups. You have in the video game industry, we have AAA development, which are your Halos, so your Microsofts and your Bungies, and Sony and so forth. You have independent game developers. Those can range in size and scope. And then you have your mobile market, and there's actually quite a lot of money in mobile. So that is an avenue that you can take. In military simulation, there's medical, there's obviously the military part, and then there's various other trainings. Lots of different companies hire game designers to make training simulations. I think even NASA has hired game designers, and actually some from Full Sail. So yes. And of course, we have the gambling industry, which it's an interesting field because it is changing as as millennials have grown older. Las Vegas and other gambling companies have noticed that there is that there player base is aging. In order to rectify that and get new blood in, they've been slowly but surely moving over from the total randomly skill-based types of gamblings more to gamblings or gamblings with skill and probability. And that is something game designers can do. So lots of game designers are actually going there as well. And of course, you have slot machines and you have other gambling machines, even those gambling games on the phone. Game designers can get jobs doing all of those things. So, no designer is an island. We work with teams of people. Some of these teams include management, programming, art, and of course, we work with other designers. So, learning how to communicate both verbally and with the written word is really important. Documentation is really important. And, those are some of the things we're going to be going over. So, how do you know if your game idea is good? Basically, if you're a junior on the team and you have an idea that you want to present to your peers, how do you go about it? Do you write a document? Do you, try to set up a meeting with your team to go over it? Well, actually, what you're going to do is end up making a prototype, because the prototype is going to speak a lot better than any of your words are going to, and they're going to make a lot more sense because people can actually sit down and play it. One of the problems that we run into is most ideas sound good and sound feasible. That is until you try to do it. So when you sit down and you make a prototype and present it to your lead or present it to your team, they can actually play and feel what your idea is. And then they can actually make an opinion. And it's a lot easier to sell it when they can actually play it. So the next question that we run into is, well, how do you design a game? Well, secret sauce is we use this thing called the iterative design process. So basically, you come up with an idea, you document your idea, you build a prototype of your idea, and then you test it. From that test, you're going to get a whole bunch of data that you're going to analyze, and then you'll find problems and bugs, and then you're going to come up with ideas to fix those. Then you're going to document those ideas, and then you're going to build a prototype, and then you're going to test it, and you're going to go through this loop hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times until you release, I guess. So notice that, release, I guess. No game is ever truly finished. We could always make it better. We could always add something. We could always change something. Doesn't matter how professional you are in the beginning or how much knowledge you have. Once you've gone through the process and you come back to it, you could always make something more efficient. You can always make something better than you could a year or two ago. And I say a year or two ago because most video game cycles are 2+ years. Some of the independent games are, 6 to 10 months, so they will fit into that 1 year part. But, once you've at the end of the project, you could always go back and be like, oh man, I can make all these systems more efficient. But the fact of the matter is, a game does need to get out there and it does need to get released. So at a certain point, we have to realize that this is good enough and move on to the next thing. Everyone has to earn money and pay bills. Even companies like EA and Microsoft, if the game doesn't release, they've just spent millions of dollars on it and never recouped a dime. So the game has to be released so they can recoup their money and they can continue to pay their employees to make the next game. So one of the big questions we get is, why analog games? I came to Full Sail to learn how to make video games. Well, video games require specialized knowledge to make. At this point, we can't assume that you have that knowledge. Analog games do not require the knowledge of programming. And another thing is that the rules are not hidden. They're exposed. You can read them. They're right there on paper. Uh, a lot of times in video games, the rules are hidden in code. You might know how to get around things, but you don't know what the rules are. You don't know what you might not know what the enemy's HP is. There's lots of things as a player that might be hidden from you in a video game that's not hidden from you in a board game. It's all open and it's all exposed. And as novice designers, this is a really good place to start. Just like in art, before there was 3D, there was 2D. In game design, before there were video games, there were board games. And a lot of video games take inspiration from board games, even to this day. So here you'll find a list of games we recommend you research. In this class, especially if you're not familiar with these board games or not familiar with board games, the medium in general, you're going to need to do a bit of legwork. You're going to have to go out and you're going to have to research these games and, see if you can pick up a copy, or if you can't pick it up, some local game stores have copies available of some of these games that you can sit down and play. Because playing a game is a lot better than reading about it and watching a Let's Play of it. However, if that's all you have, we'll get more into that in the later future. But right here, there's a bunch of games that we recommend that you research. Each one of these games has fantastic mechanics, and they're all relatively popular games, so you can find them easily online. So where to start your search? Well, we've created some videos that go over some of these games. You'll find them in the ILA called Meaningful Choice Review ILA. You can search for these games on BoardGameGeek.com. BoardGameGeek.com is a huge website that just has I would venture to say every game in existence, but that's probably not true. But it has a vast library of games, and it has their description, and it has reviews, and you'll find what other people have to say on them. And it also has a lot of links to some descriptions on the game. You can search YouTube. All of these games are extremely popular, and they're relatively easy to find some Let's Plays or rule overviews that go over those games. Lastly, your local gaming store. Like I said before, watching a video is fine. You can learn a lot from watching a video, but nothing beats playing the game for yourself. Yeah, you can tell that a roller coaster is fun by watching it on YouTube, but you're never gonna get the experience, or you won't have the same experience as if you were on the roller coaster yourself. So if you have the opportunity, I encourage you to go out and play these games. And remember, when you're playing them, it's not for the purpose of having fun, even though that will be a side effect of it. You really want to sit down and understand the mechanic, understand what the game loop is. And some of these things may not make sense right now, but basically it's what makes the game the game. How you play things. And again, when you go and you do some research on them, you'll hear some things. No, we'll go over it more because it has to do a lot with meaningful choice. So, what is a meaningful choice? Well, a meaningful choice is an action a player willingly elects to take based solely on information presented in the game that actually has an impact on the game. This is super important to us as game designers because it's the meaningful choices that really make a game fun. So, here are some other ways to think about meaningful choice. I don't expect most of you to grasp it right away. This is a topic, and that does take a little bit of a concept, actually, that takes a lot of time, or will take some time for you to wrap your head around. Another way to think about meaningful choice, and this is a question that you can ask yourself to see if your game has meaningful choice or to see if any game has meaningful choice. Ask yourself the question, can you purposely lose the game? If so, your game has meaningful choices. So let's take an example. The game of war. Can you purposely lose the game of war? No, you can't. Actually, all you can do is draw a card and put it down, and if the card you drew is higher than the person that drew their card, uh, you win. You can't actually lose that game on purpose. So that game doesn't have meaningful choice. And in fact, it does not have meaningful choice. So, games without meaningful choice are a lot like amusement park rides. They can be entertaining, but it's the same experience every time. Uh, Another example of a game that doesn't have any meaningful choice is craps, rolling dice. Can you purposely choose to lose? No. You just roll the dice, and what comes up is what happens. So, yeah, in general, you'll find that out, and you'll see that mentioned a couple times. Rolling dice isn't meaningful. It can be fun. It's totally fun rolling dice, but it doesn't make it meaningful. So, let's go over a couple things that meaningful choice is not. Strategy often gets equated with meaningful choice, and this is not necessarily the case. Strategies are typically dynamics. Random actions such as dice rolling and guessing, those aren't meaningful choices. Choosing between two or more blind choices, i.e. whether I draw a card from pile 1 or pile 2 or pile 1,000,000, that is not a meaningful choice. So we'll go over dynamics a little bit. Dynamics are player behaviors that emerge from the rules, but are not explicitly stated in the rules. Couple of examples of dynamics is grinding experience in an RPG. Nowhere in the rules does it say you need to grind experience in an RPG, yet people do it because it makes your game later on easier. Dodgeball is a great example of dynamics. So when you find that one team has all the balls, you'll see that the opponents will actually move further away from the middle line and they'll spread out. So that way, if one of them gets hit by the ball, there's less of a chance for their teammates to get hit. Now, nowhere in the rules for dodgeball does it say when the other team has all the balls, you should move back and spread out. That's a natural human behavior that has come from the rules to counter a specific thing. Poker is another good example. Bluffing is not part of the rules. Nowhere in poker does it say you have to bluff. This is a dynamic that has evolved from the mechanic. So now we go to choices. We went over meaningful choices, now we're going to go over choices. So remember, you don't choose to do what you're directed to do. The first two cards in blackjack are not a choice. Later ones are. Another example is you don't choose to roll dice in Monopoly under normal circumstances. The rules dictate that you roll the dice. So, as you see in there, we have a decision point, and then we have a bunch of options that a player can actually choose from. And notice that it has to be more than one choice. If it's just a decision point and there's only one choice, that is not a choice. Choices are actions. And let's take a look at some forms of choices. Our first one is blind choice. Blind choice is an optional action a player can do but has no context on how this action is going to affect the game. An example is drawing a card from the deck. When you draw the card, you're hoping for the best. However, you have no concrete evidence that you're going to get what it is that you need. Blind choices, by their very nature, are not meaningful choices. There's Hobson's choice, and most of us are familiar with this, but not by the name Hobson's choice. This is the take it or leave it. So, this is the deal, take it or leave it. That's a Hobson's choice. Now, the interesting thing about this is in video games, it's normally take it or take it, right? You can't actually progress forward in the game unless you do this thing. We commonly see this in RPGs, where you can go left or you can go right. You choose to go left, and all of a sudden a boulder falls from the heavens and blocks your path, forcing you to go right. Another Hobson's choice, and this one's a little bit more recent, so it might be more relevant now, but who knows, 10 years from now. In Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. In very early parts of the game, you meet the final boss and you can have a battle with him. And typically speaking, he is overwhelming and he will typically beat your character and will cut off your arm. Well, if you are skilled enough, you can actually beat him. Uh, and you think, yeah, I beat him. I'm going to keep my arm. No, you don't keep your arm. Uh, a weapon gets thrown at you from the distance and you end up losing your arm anyway. So that is another Hobson's choice. Again, in video games, it's mostly take it or take it. Either way, no matter what you have done in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, you're gonna lose your arm. Now, we have two things here. We have skill and we have randomness. Well, the obvious question is, how much randomness versus how much skill? What's right? Well, skill and randomness both have their place with all games, even analog games. Skill is where our meaningful choices come from, right? We make choices, and these choices, especially in strategy games, have to be thought out. So there's a skill that you need to have and an understanding of the game and its rules and mechanics. And to some extent, their dynamics. And then, of course, there's randomness. So randomness tends to make a game more forgiving. All right, if you have an overwhelmingly skilled player, if you add elements of randomness to it, you can try to level the playing field. And randomness can be fun because it adds that element of luck. And we as human beings, we tend to like that element of luck in games. However, if it's all randomness, then there is no skill and then there's not much engagement. So there needs to be a balance there between skill and randomness. That's easier said than done, obviously. So I'll go out on a limb and I would say err on the side of skill. If you have to go one way or the other, I think, and most people would agree, that more meaningful choices in a game is better than more randomness. Now, not everybody's going to agree with that, but for the purposes of this class, your game will need to have a majority of it be skill-based. So err on the side of skill. Now let's look at that a little bit closer. So we have two types of randomness, input randomness and output randomness. So input randomness allows you to deal with a random event. Output randomness forces you to accept the random event. So let's see a good example. You're playing some type of Civ game, and output randomness would be, okay, you had a hurricane that destroys 5 of your buildings. You have to deal with that event now. That would be an input randomness. Sorry. Output randomness. Input randomness would be, in 5 turns, there's a hurricane coming. Now you have cards or whatever it is that you're given in the game to deal with minimizing the threat of what will happen to your city. And those are just 2 examples. There's a ton of them out there. And as you play these games, you'll become more familiar with it. A lot of these concepts are tough to put into words, and when you actually just sit down and play them, they actually become really innate and easy to understand because, again, once you playing something and actually doing something, uh, you just learn and get a lot more experience than just reading about it. So go out and play games, board games specifically for this class. So what separates us from other media? Well, our biggest thing is we can make it so that players' input can affect the entire experience. Doesn't happen that often, but we can do it. The most famous failures of this are Mass Effect 3, where, each ending just gave you a different color beam. Uh, you know, you didn't have much influence on the outcome there, right? But, we can actually make it so that games have different endings depending on what you did in the game. Of course, that just means more time and expense, which is why it doesn't happen that often. But, that's something that we can do. That typically isn't done in other medias. Movies, typically speaking, and I would say majority of them, have a fixed ending. You're just there along for the ride. You're just seeing what's happening. Books, with the caveat of choose your own adventure books, are the same thing. You're there, you're an observer along for the ride. While in a video game, you can be an influencer, or at least the player is an influencer. At least it can be. I'm not saying that every game does that because some games don't. But yeah, we can change the results based on player decisions because we are an interactive media. All right, so at this time, does anyone have any questions? Because we're going to go into documentation next. And, documentation is definitely not as glamorous as anything else that we'll be doing, but it is definitely an essential part. All right, so far we're all good. So we're going to continue on with documentation. So let's start. Why is documentation so important? So here we see the Royal Game of Ur. Now this board game is over 3,000 years old. Archaeologists first discovered the board, which you see there on the left, and they, for many years, have been trying to figure out how to play this game, or how the ancients played this game. And then one day, an archaeologist stumbled across this tablet here that you see on the right. And on this tablet are the rules for how to play this game, the Royal Game of Ur. That's 3,000 years old. So documentation can really have a big impact on it. We have a game that we now can play that they played 3,000 years ago. And that is facilitated because somebody took time to document the rules. So yeah, and by the way, 3,000 years old. Somebody made a game 3,000 years ago. Our profession, not video game makers, but game makers, has been around for over 3,000 years. So another thing about documentation, every company has their own way that they do things. We cannot possibly go over all of them. Actually, we can't even know some of them. Some of you may know, some of you may not know. But video game companies tend to be very tight-lipped about their internal processes. But we do know that all of them share certain things. So we came up with a system, and this is unique to Full Sail, but you'll find this in part or in whole in other companies as well. It's called the Gratis system. And it stands for goals, rules, actions, transitions, items, and setup. So let's go into each one of these a little bit more. So goals. We start from the short-term goal, and we're going to use Uno as the example. So our short-term goal is get more matching cards. Then we move on to our medium-term goals. Our medium-term goal in Uno is to lower our hand size. Then we have the object of the game. The object of the game in Uno is to play your final card and get out. All right. So as you can see, the goals are broken up into what we want to do on our turn, what we want to do in the middle of the game, and what the object of the game. How do you win the game? So this is the goals, or these are the goals. And again, we're using Uno as the example. The game that you may come up with may not be this. Probably won't be this. Next, we have the rules. Assume your players have never played a game. Rules, there are two important things rules should have. They should be complete. A player should not be wondering what it is that they have to do next or what it is that they can do next. Secondly, they should be clear. If you've ever watched anime, one of the really good things that you'll see that they do is they always explain the ultimate move, no matter how many episodes it's been. So for those of you who've watched Dragon Ball Z, every time he's going to do the Spirit Bomb, you will notice that they explain what it is that he's doing. That is actually really good. In rules, we want to be like that. We want to assume that the player has no idea what we're talking about. And some of you may not have access to this, but if you have a child that you can use for a playtest, if they can play your game based on the rules, you've done an awesome job. Next, we're going to talk about actions. Now, these are the verbs of the game. We'll do Uno as the example. We have shuffle cards, draw cards, play cards, etc. Not every action that you do is a meaningful one, but they still should be listed. You, as the designer, you want to make sure that you list all of your actions, and you want to make sure that the majority of your actions are meaningful ones. So are ones that allow players to make a choice that will impact the game. So this particular section, the action section, you may not see when you go out into the field, but as a student, this is very helpful because it forces you to sit down and analyze your game to determine how much meaningful choice, how many actual actions a player can choose from are in your game. And if you start to see that the majority of the actions are not meaningful choices, are just processes, things that a computer could do without human input, you might want to rethink what it is that you're doing. Again, there's no point in a person playing a game that a computer can just run on its own. Transitions. Now, this is one that students have quite a bit of trouble with. For the purposes of GD1, most of you are going to have three transitions. You're going to have your start game, you're going to have your end game, and you're going to have the action that ends the player's turn. That might be 1 to 3. That's what I typically see from student designs in Game Design 1. So in Uno, we have start game, end game, play card, and draw a card, right? Because you can end your turn by drawing a card and then it passes your turn to the next player. As you see, I have a little asterisk there. There's a such thing as a game transition. This happens in some games. I haven't seen this happen in a student design game yet, but there are such a things as game transitions and you should be aware of them. This happens when the gameplay changes once a certain event or condition has been triggered or met. There is a board game called House on Haunted Hill. This is a cooperative explorative game where you and your friends are exploring this haunted house. And after a certain point, an event called the Haunt will trigger. At this point, typically what ends up happening is one person will become the haunt, and now it goes from a cooperative game to an all versus one style game. So a game transition typically changes the way the entire game plays. In House on Haunted Hill, it was all versus all. I mean, it was co-op. Now it becomes all versus one. And there are not a lot of games that do this, but they do exist, and as a designer, you should be aware of them. Items. This is really straightforward. These are the components of the game. If you've ever had a board game before, you'll notice that on the back of the box, it tells you what the contents of the box are. That's the items. It just tells you everything that would come in the box. So in your case, it'd be everything you would need to play the game. Again, in Uno, we have 108 cards. They'd list out, there's 0 cards, and there's 4 of them, 1 for each color. They have the one card, they have 8 of them, 2 of each color. And it goes on and on and on. The setup. Now these are the rules on how to place your items before you begin play, and all the things that you need to get in place to play the game. This is a really important part. One of the things you will note on this particular section is that there are no meaningful choices here. This is a dictation on how players should lay out the game so that they can begin play. And as a designer, it's really important for you to think about this. We'll go over it a little bit more next week. In class, we have them play a game called Werewolf. And one of the important things that we want to get out of that is something as simple as changing where a player is seated in comparison to the other players can change the experience a player has in the game. All of these things are important, and as a designer, you need to be aware of all of these things and understand that each and every one of them can have a significant impact on how players perceive your game. So now we're going to go over the flowchart. Now the purpose of a flowchart, at least for Game Design 1, is that it's going to be a visual representation of a player's turn. We have 4 shapes that we are going to use. We have the rectangular shape, which is the process. We have the parallelogram shape, which is a player decision. We have the conditional shape, which is a diamond. All of those ask a question. And then we have the circle, which is a go-to shape. Now the process, you'll note, it correlates to a rule that a player has to do. It only has 1 arrow coming out of it. It can only ever have 1 arrow coming out of it. This is something like shuffle cards or start turn. Right? These are things that are just stated that the players do. A player decision is typically a meaningful choice. It can have 1 arrow or it can have many arrows. And when I say many, I mean there is no limit to how many you can have. They are the rules that you have in your games that are directly linked to the meaningful choice. A conditional asks a question. And that's the biggest differentiation between the two. A player decision is typically a statement. A conditional is typically a question. A conditional always has at least 2 arrows, but it can have as many arrows as you need. But it always has at least 2, because the question that you ask, typically speaking, not always, is a binary choice. So it's yes or no. The go-to shape, typically speaking, in Game Design 1, you'll only see for start game and end game. That being said, when you start making larger, more involved games or systems, you'll use the go-to shape to go to another flowchart or to go to another section of the flowchart. And when I say that, it's typically because when you're working on a larger scale game or a larger system, it will encompass more than one page. So the go-to shape can be really useful. Another time you'll see the go-to shape is in a game that's broken up into a lot of phases. So if you have a bidding phase, you might have a flowchart for the bidding part of the game. You might have an auction part, which, an auction phase. So you'll have a flowchart that just goes over what happens in the auction phase. Again, I typically don't see that in games designed for Game Design 1, typically because those are a lot more involved, and most of the games that we see are typically less involved. So, flowchart rules. You'll notice that there is a correlation between the gratis and the flowchart. The goals, the rules, and the actions are all represented in the flowchart, and the setup is also represented in the flowchart. Typically, before your start turn happens, all of the rules for the setup have been listed, and then you'll go into your loop. The biggest takeaway here is that the goals, the rules, and actions and the flowchart, everything that's mentioned in there should be in the flowchart, and everything that you have in the flowchart should be represented in one of those three sections. So here we have an example flowchart for the game Go Fish. So as you can see, before start turn, we have a bunch of setup rules, right? We start the game, we nominate a dealer, we shuffle cards, and we deal 5 cards to every player. After that, we start our turn. The next thing that we do, you see the arrows pointing to the left, it goes to the parallelogram, which is a player decision. Ask another player for a card. So you get to choose who to ask for a card. Now, next we go to a conditional. Does the player have a card? Or does the player have the card you asked for? Let's say they do. So the next thing is you receive the card. Notice that that is a rectangular shape. It's a process. According to the rules of Go Fish, if that player has the card you asked for, they have to give it to you. So they don't have a choice. That's why it is the player decision. It is not the player decision shape. That's why it's the process. So from there, we go down and we see that, do you have 4 of the same type of card? Let's say we don't. So no. Have all the cards been drawn? And we'll say no, they haven't been. It's only the first turn. So now it goes to the next player's turn. So now the next player starts their turn. Notice we just made the game loop. We're starting all over again. So now the next player is going. Now that player asks another player for a card. Does that player have a card? This time we're going to say that they don't. So we go to Go Fish. The next thing that we do is, have all cards been drawn? No. So then the player will draw a card and it'll be the next person's turn. And you see how that's just an overview of what happens in the game Go Fish of a player's turn. It doesn't have every single detail. It doesn't say, well, it does say scorebook, but it doesn't say, well, like I said, it's just an overview. It doesn't go into every single rule. It doesn't say, did the player ask for an 8? Does the player have an 8 or not? It's just general overview. So, let's summarize the documentation. So, to make games, to like good games, you're going to have to actually make games, and you're going to have to make a lot of games. Making games is a skill, like any other. The more you do it, the better you'll get at it. You're going to need to be able to speak intelligently about your game and about your decisions. Remember that communication is super important, verbally and written. Real meaningful choices are essential to all games. Understand that luck, which is randomness for us, factors into your game. How much is appropriate? We say err on the side of less randomness. Also note that the opposite of randomness, the opposite of skill is randomness, not luck. Remember input versus output randomness? One has an event that causes, one has the event happening and you have to react. The other one tells you that the event is going to happen and allows you to prepare. Remember the value of thorough documentation. 3,000 years from now, somebody might be able to find your design and be able to play it from the rules you've created. Goals must involve decisions and may be focused on different timescales. Remember that the 3 timescales we went over are short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Use the standard shapes to describe the game flow. Remember that we used the process, which is a rectangular shape. We used parallelogram, which is the player decision. We used the conditional shape, which is the diamond. And we use the circle, which is the go-to shape. Remember that every action, rule, and goal should be represented in the flowchart. So now let's take some time to go over this week's assignment. This week's assignment is fairly straightforward. It is the UNO GDD. Give me a second while I load up the UNO GDD. So as you can see, this is the UNO GDD. You will see on FSO that there are 3 files that you're going to get. And actually, give me a second, let me pull up FSO. That way we can just go through it. I know that there's one issue that students usually run into that I'll try to help you out with. And that is just getting the files. So this is FSO. You'll find the UNO assignment in week 1. It's called assignment 1.2, uno.gdd. When you click on it, you'll see the instructions for the assignment, which I'm not going to go over with you, as you guys can just take your time and read through it. One of the things you want to make sure you read and understand is the showstoppers. Showstoppers are things that will automatically net you a 0. You want to avoid these. Here you're going to find the 3 documents I'm talking about. We have assignment 1 underscore UNO assignment.doc. We have UNO flowchart underscore assignment XML. I will show you how to open that and what we do with it. And then you have assignment 1 underscore UNO template.pdf. So if you're on an iPad, which some of you might be, you want to watch the videos that we created on using the iPad. I'm not going to go over that. Right now I'm on a PC. If you have any questions about that, or if you're having trouble, you can reach out to your instructor, or you can reach out to me on Discord, and I will get back to you as soon as I see it. The iPad, all the work in this class is doable. However, give yourself more time if you're working on an iPad, because there's about 5 additional steps to every one thing that you need to do on a PC. So it just requires more time. You will not be able to download these files if you're on the iPad. You will have to use this zip file. So that's this on iPad. Click here to download. So that's something you'll have to do if you're on an iPad. But for the rest of this recording, we're going to assume that you're on a PC or a laptop. So if you want to download these things, the best thing to do is to right-click on it and save link as. Now, if you're using Internet Explorer, it's going to be save target as, but they both do the same thing. It will actually save this to your computer. You want to do that for all 3 documents. I already have them, so I'm not going to actually do that. So the next thing, once you actually have all this stuff downloaded, the first thing that you should do is get onto your Google, and you're going to want to, let's see, I'm going to create a new document. It's a new Google Docs. And let me put that up. So this is a blank untitled document in Google Docs. You're going to want to open the .doc file, which is this one here, in Google Docs. So let's do that. To do that, we're going to go to File, Open. You're going to go to this Upload tab and select File from Device. Now I have this file here. You'll see that this has a little Word document. It also says Type Microsoft Word. You want to be sure that you open up this one. You want to give it a little bit of time. It's actually going to open up here. And now you have it in your Google Drive. Now, the reason why we want you to work on this is, one, we created it here. So all of the formatting is going to stay fine. Secondly, this has a history. It has what we call a repo. So let's say we deleted all of this. Our cat jumped on here and tapped in a bunch of stuff. Everything got screwed up. And you know what? It's due in 5 minutes. I spent so much time working on this, and now it's all been ruined. Well, no, it's not. Over here, just to the right of Help, you'll see all changes saved in Drive. If you click on that, you'll have a history. Now you'll see mine only has 2 because we just opened this document. As you're making edits, this is constantly saving in the background, so you'll have quite a lot of them. And you can go back to the revision that you want. And you'll notice that the current version, you'll see has all these strike-throughs here. That's everything that's changed and been deleted. And you'll see that some of this stuff has been added. Well, I don't want any of that. I wanted my assignment that was perfectly fine and well. So you click on that and you just click on this button here, Restore this version. It'll give you this warning. Your current document will revert to this version from today at the time will make different on yours. But one of the things you should notice, once you restore to this version, all of the other history that's after this one will be destroyed. Which is fine. Right now I don't care. I want this version. So now it's back. So no work lost. Now typically in the game industry, we work with this tool called Perforce. It's a revision software. As we make changes to the project, we upload it to Perforce. And we could always revert back to what we had before or what we had when we first started. It has a history of all the changes made. And it also keeps a backup of it. So let's say you accidentally deleted everything that you worked on from the entire project. Well, typically speaking, you're not the admin of it. So the admin should be able to get back on Perforce and undelete everything that you deleted. So it's typically used, especially on bigger companies and on bigger projects. Especially when you have millions and millions of dollars involved. You don't want an angry person who just got fired or something to log in and try to delete the entire 2 or 3 years worth of work. So typically speaking, we use software, revision history software, and Perforce is the biggest one. There are other ones out there, but by far Perforce is the leading one. So that is how you bring in your document into Google Docs. Next, we have the PDF. Now you notice that you have a bunch of highlighted stuff. Well, let's do side-by-side view with this one. you'll notice that this information here is missing. Well, for this assignment, what we want you to do is to take this information and insert it into your document. Everything that is missing is highlighted in blue. Now you'll note it happens sometimes when you are, when you are doing this, yeah, you'll see that this one is highlighted. Well, you don't want to keep that highlight. And actually, I should do this in, where is it? There it is. As you can see, this is coming up still highlighted. Well, you don't want the highlight. So in order to get rid of it, you just click up here. You'll see the little highlight. Just click on none. Now from this point, as you type, it should not be highlighted. And you would go through and your name would go here. Age is 7+, so that would go here. And you'll go through the document. Now, it's not very challenging, it's not very hard, but that's not the point of this assignment. The point of this assignment is to get you familiar with using Google Docs and with using Draw.io, which is the next thing we'll be getting into. At the very bottom of this, you'll see we have a flowchart. At the very bottom of your document, you'll see that you have the title flowchart, but you have no flowchart. Well, this third file here, this Uno assignment.xml, this is actually the template for the flowchart. Now you'll note, if you just click on it, you're going to get a bunch of useless data that you can't do anything with. You have to right click on it, hit Save Linked As. That will download it to your system. Now once it's downloaded to your system, you have to go to the website, draw.io. From our options, we're going to select Open Existing Document. I've already downloaded the XML file, it's right there. Just click Open, and you'll see that here we have the flowchart. Now, let's take a look. Where, man, excuse me, I must have closed down. This is our cheat sheet, basically. Here, we've given you all the answers. You'll note that there are 5 errors in this flowchart. Some of them are missing, some shapes have changed, some things need to be renamed. The flowchart that we've provided you with is correct. Use this as your guide. You're going to go through and you're going to make changes here. And at the end, you'll be sure to delete that. Once it's all done and it's fine, you're going to go to File, Export As, and you're going to export it as a PNG. I like a border width of 5. That's just basically tells you how much space it's going to give around the document. You're going to hit Export. It's going to ask you where you want it. You can either put it in your Google Drive if you're linked to it. If not, download it to your device. Once it has finished downloading, which it'll typically download to your Downloads folder, let's see. Yep. So here, it's downloaded to the Downloads folder. Now what you're going to do is you're going to put your cursor just below flowchart. So it's on this line here. You see that it's blinking. You just click on the file. Sorry, it's Insert Image. and you want to upload it from your computer. If you downloaded it from your computer, if it's on your drive, you want to use this drive option. I have it on my computer. It's in downloads. So here I'm just gonna go to my downloads, double click it, and as you see, it'll insert it into the document. Now, once I'm done and I've made all the changes, and this is the assignment that I am going to turn in, the assignment tells you that it wants the file format to be a .pdf. So to do that, you go to File, Download As, and you'll note we have options here. PDF is an option. You click on that and it'll download it as a PDF. Now, one of the things, once it's downloaded, you want to double check to make sure that it is correct. There is a known issue that happens rarely, but it does happen to students, where the images, which in our case is the flowchart, it's a PNG, that's an image, don't show up. If that happens to you, in the assignment, in the instructions here in the assignment, at the very bottom, we have this workaround for PDF problems. Just go through this and follow along with these steps, and you will be able to get a PDF that shows your images. Now, again, this doesn't happen that often, but you might find that it happens to you. One of the things you should do, and this is for the entirety of your career, is you should double check your work. Nothing makes people more angry than you submitting something into the project that breaks the entire project because you decided to just upload your stuff and not double check it. People get really mad about that, especially when you did it and you're on vacation for 2 weeks. Don't be that person, because we will remember. Everyone remembers. So, before I let you all go, I want to go over some stuff in Draw.io. Let me bring that up again. Here we are. So let's create a new document, and we're just doing this so that I can show you some stuff with it. So if you're on a PC, this is going to be the layout you see. Remember the 4 shapes that we can use are the rectangle, the diamond shape, parallelogram, and the circle shape. Now, to type, you just click on the shape that you want and you can type. You can resize it, and you'll notice that by just left clicking and moving around, it is resizing ununiformly. So let's undo that. I hit Control Z to undo it. If you click on the side and hold Shift, it'll scale uniformly. When you hover over it, you'll notice that you have a bunch of these little blue X's. Those are points that you can connect to with an arrow, and you'll see that you actually have 4 arrows, one that's going up, one that's going down, one that's going left, and one that's going right. If you hover over them, you'll see that they'll turn solid. If you click, left click, and hold, and just go to another shape, you'll see that the little X's are showing up. If you go to one of those shapes, you'll see this little green circle that's showing what X you're attaching to. If you let go while over that, you've now attached this line to this shape. So now, as you move that shape around, you'll notice that the arrow will follow it. Otherwise, let's just make another one. We're not going to attach it. I'm going to just try to move this up here. It looks like it's attached, but when you try to move it, you'll notice that it's not attached at all. The only way to undo that is going to be to delete it. And then reattach it, and make sure that you see the little green dot, or you'll see the little green line. And now it's attached at that point, and now you can move it around. Now, if you want to change how the line flows, you just click on the line and you'll see these little blue points. These little blue points you can move around to straighten your line or to change the way it flows. Now, if you want to add text to your line, if you click on it and just start typing, you'll be able to label your arrow. You'll see on the right, you have all the options that you would for any type of text. This one's the line boldness. If you double click on it, click and then click again. Actually, let's just type. So now that we're typing, you'll notice that I have tools to change my text. So I can make it bold, I can make it italicized, and I'd have to select it. But yeah, I can make it bold or italicized, and have it underlined. I can do a strike through if I needed. I can change its positioning. Do I want it center aligned? Do I want it left or right aligned? You can make bullet points. You can change the font color, the background color of it. So all the options are here. That's the basis of everything that you'll do here. One of the things you want to note is, typically speaking, this page here is 8.5 by 11.5, so which is the standard size for a page. If you need more room, just drag your node over there or the shape over there, and it will automatically add an additional page to where you dragged it, and that's in all directions. Typically speaking, try to keep yourself constrained to this area. Again, remember that you can move things around, you can edit things so that they fit better. Some rules that you want to follow: don't have lines intersect one another. This can be really confusing. So you want to make sure that you don't have them intersect each other. If you have more than one arrow coming out of either a player decision or a conditional shape, you want to make sure they're labeled, even if they're the same names as the nodes they're going to. Now, I know that doesn't make sense for most diagrams that we will be working on in Game Design 1. However, when you are working on more complex flowcharts or system graphs later on in your career, you might go beyond 1 or 2 pages, and having them labeled, having those arrows labeled, really helps keep things in order and really helps you follow along to the node you're supposed to get to. So that is a habit that we want you to start now, so that it is just a habit later on when you're actually working in the field. So with that, that is week 1's live lecture. I will give this time for anyone who wants to ask questions. If not, I will end the live lecture and upload this video to YouTube and put a link on Discord so that everyone who didn't attend can have a chance to review what we went over. Excuse me. All right, so with that, I'm going to assume that there are no questions, and I'm going to end the live lecture for this week.